two short readings, actually a reading and a poem before the sermon. The first is this. In Judaism, trees are regarded as extremely precious and important. There are blessings over the first buds of spring, and also when we eat the fruits for the first time in that season. There is a saying that if the Messiah is coming while you are planting a tree, finish planting the tree, and then go and greet the Messiah. The poem is by famed naturalist and poet Wendell Berry. It's called Woods. I part the out-thrusting branches and come in beneath the blessed and the blessing trees. Though I am silent, there is singing around me. Though I am dark, there is vision around me. Though I am heavy, there is flight around me. So I have a quick question for you this morning. How do you feel about trees? It's a good place to ask the question. Look about and remind yourself, how do I feel about trees? It's a quirky way to start off, I'll grant you, but it's honestly asked. Where do trees fit into the larger mosaic of your life? What trees do you know? What trees do you pass by? What trees of childhood memory remain? What trees do you nurture or have to cut down? How do you feel about trees? Well, we are blessed with an embarrassment of riches to choose from in answering that question. Think about the range of trees in the world, from the tiniest bonsai to the Methodist trees solemnly circling the green in Ocean Grove, to the towering London plane trees that line the promenades of Central Park or many a main street in this country. We are literally surrounded by trees. Even saying their names, once you learn them, becomes a kind of spoken word poetry. Poplar, pine, pawpaw, palm, sycamore, ash, aspen, elm, baobab and banyan, redwood and white gum, moosewood and mangrove. And who among us isn't moved when standing in front of some giant representation of that species, some leafy monument to the long, slow reach of time and the revolution of the world? It may interest you to know that the oldest recorded tree in New Jersey, at least that I could discover, and it's estimated by measuring the girth, but they go 4 feet up from the ground, is located not that far from here, south, in Salem, New Jersey. It is known, not surprisingly, as the Salem oak. At 85 feet high and 22 feet around, the massively large silver oak is estimated to have taken root between 500 and 600 years ago, give or take 100 years. That puts it at about 1500 AD, which is impressive, of course, until you start looking around for other examples of truly old trees. You know these facts, I suspect. The towering, almost unearthly California sequoias, a visit to which really ought to be on your bucket list, if you haven't done that yet. They routinely surpass 1,000 years old, and current estimates place the oldest at about 3,500 years of age. 3,500 years, and the thing is still alive. It puts out growth every year. I don't know about you, but I could almost stop the sermon right there. To stand in the presence of such a being, to stand under the climbing cathedral of rising bark and limbs, suspended like red and green clouds above the world, that is as good an altar to holiness as anything I can think of. In our daily lives, of course, we benefit from trees immensely. The paper in our printers, the bones of our furniture, the framing for the rooms that shelter us from the elements, all come from harvested trees. At this very moment, all around us in this congregation's treehouse, we literally worship under the boughs of trusses and beams. We are literally enshrined in a long-vanished wood, our very own, very small Ark of the Covenant. We owe to trees. Now, we know, partly from the dire words of the song we just heard, but also from the news, that covenant between humans and trees isn't going so well these days. And that fact has, of course, become big news over the last 20 plus years. Global warming, it was first called that, do you remember? Now called, more properly, climate change, is an undisputed scientific fact. Even the very far right has come to understand that. And nearly every month, if not every week, there seems to be some news item about the weather or the Paris Accords or sea temperature rise that demonstrates once more, in case there was any doubt left in your mind, that something very big is also very broken in our world. Only last month, you may have read in your newspapers or heard on the news, scientists reported that the hottest 2 years in recorded history just passed. And meteorologists are warning that the next 2 years look to be on track to be even hotter. The news out of the most recent Paris Climate Accords, while not without its complications, seem to offer a glimmer of hope, right? We're seeing that human promise of finally, against the odds of greed and money and apathy, inertia, we seem to be coming together as a global community. But the odds, however, and I think any of us who've been paying even half-hearted attention will understand this, the odds appeared stacked. It is going to be a long, hard haul if we are to make the changes we have to make. If not for us, certainly for my children and their children. Even the online news source, Positive News, you can sort of gather from the title what kind of news it's after, takes an anxious tone when reporting on the Paris climate talks. Perhaps most significantly, they wrote, and for the first time in human history, the Paris talks have led to a unanimously endorsed policy position, which appears completely at odds with continued fossil fuel dominance. The world, it says, aims to be net zero in emissions of CO2 by the end of the century, But despite the rush to celebrate the end of the fossil fuel era, the truth is likely to be more complicated. Have we even begun to imagine how net zero emissions can be achieved? To consider the implications for changing the ways in which millions of people live? How do we as citizens want this to be done? None of the options currently available are straightforward or palatable to many, whether through reducing our own consumption, through an acceleration of renewable energy or nuclear power, or the use of still speculative carbon extraction technologies. We simply don't know. Journalist and climate activist Naomi Klein puts it even more starkly, and I apologize, the news is a bit grim. This is in a recent thought piece for Bill Moyer's website called "Climate Change is not just about things getting hotter, it's about things getting meaner." Climate change is violence, she says. It is. Some of the violence is grindingly slow, rising seas that gradually erase whole nations, and droughts that kill many thousands. Some of the violence is terrifyingly fast. Storms with names such as Katrina and Haiyan that steal thousands of lives in a single roiling event. When governments and corporations knowingly fail to act to prevent catastrophic warming, that too is an act of violence. It is a violence so large, so global, and inflicted against so many temporalities simultaneously, ancient cultures, present lives, future potential, that there is not yet a word capable of containing its monstrousness. So here we are, friends, in the midst of our Ark of Covenant, and also in the midst of all else that too often goes wrong in life, right? The broken relationships, the bodies that grow ill or old or both, the ancient trouble of poverty, injustice, and yes, violence. And we have managed to add, in a relatively short period of time, one more to the list. This is a heavy load for us to carry. I don't know about you, but listening to this song made me depressed. We don't
for
sing...
cheerful climate change songs.
It tells the story correctly, in part. Reading all this, trying to take it all in, it does occur to me that maybe the first storytellers of the Bible, the Genesis creators, were right. Eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge isn't always what it's cracked up to be. And I don't know about you, but lots of times I just can't pay attention for a bit. I need a rest. What is a body to do? It feels too much. What do we have to put up against all that, all the violence of it, all the monstrousness? I despair when I dare to confront it, when I listen hard enough. Do you despair as well sometimes? Let's go back to our visionaries. Let's go back to Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and I lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things. And remember these words, I part the out-thrusting branches and come in beneath the blessed and the blessing trees. Though I am silent, there is singing around me. Though I am dark, there is vision around me. And though I am heavy, there is flight around me. At times like the ones we are in, why does it always seem like we're in one of those times? But at times like these, one way to begin is to remember the trees, which is really to say, to recall nature and your own place in it. You are situated smack in the midst of a beautiful woods. And also to remember your own resilient, bark-covered, lightning-scarred, but still sap-filled heart. Which is to say, remember the life all around that springs up still, unbidden, unlooked for, so graceful, and just as real and attention-getting as all that bad news combined. In a factual way, it is clear that we need trees more than they need us. But even more to the point, and I think this is a spiritual point, a religious point, that we forget, perhaps, in our removedness from the world. We are stuck with each other. We are symbionts together. A bit like family and neighbors, and yes, even sometimes fellow congregants, we share this world together. Whether any of us, trees included, might wish it otherwise. But perhaps if you look deep into the woods and up into the branches and into our own sap-filled hearts, we will find something. Call it strength, or wisdom, or religious insight, or maybe just courage when we're scared. Call it whatever you like. Call it God. But we need help to keep going in our overheated lives as well as in this overheated world. I would stop for a second and say, I recognize we need to be careful here, right? There's action and there's the romance of nature. Humans love to do that, go out and be romantic in nature while the world crumbles. Do you recall the Shel Silverstein book? I brought it today. The giving tree. Very big in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, maybe even today. Parents or well-meaning friends would give this book to children to confuse them and make them sad. I was given one, can you tell? Apologies if this is your favorite book in the whole world. It's beautiful. For those of you who don't know this book, the basic storyline is simple. A boy comes to love a tree, to play in its branches, to eat its apples, to climb up its trunk. The boy's attention and love made the tree very happy. But as is the way of humans, at least some humans, the boy grows up, becomes a teenager, then a young man, then a middle-aged man, and then finally an older man. And along the way, gradually abandons the tree. And only returns when he wants something from it, right? Apples to sell to make money as a teenager, to be happy, Shell writes, to be happy. Limbs to make a house so I can be happy. And finally, the trunk of the tree, to make a boat, to take that sad man far away from here. And each time, the tree gives. Because out of the giving comes its own happiness, we are told. And in the end, cut down my trunk, the tree says, and make a boat so you can be happy. And the man did. And the words go, and the tree was happy, ... but not really. The end of the story has the boy return, now a tired and rather lost man, whose last use of the tree is as a stump to sit on, to rest his weary bones, after that long search for happiness that used up all of the tree except that one bit. And the story ends, the tree was happy. God, how I hated that story. I did, I'm sorry. I'm sure others of you were smarter and wiser and extracted the meaning, but for me, the boy was so selfish and mean. And in a way I realized I even hated the tree for not standing up for itself, for not valuing its own being and turning against the increasingly violent demands of that old friend. It's a morality tale, of course it is, as old as the hills, about what happiness really means. And told in a minor key, the kids like me raised on Disney and happy endings could not get their head around. For us today, I think we have to be careful of two things. We have to be careful not to be the boy. That is the larger story of climate change, isn't it? We were given this beautiful tree. And we have, unthinkingly sometimes, with some exceptions here and there, kept cutting pieces off. We can no longer do that. We need a new way. But we also need to be careful not to be like the giving tree. Not too much. When it comes to climate change and our own spiritual lives, we need to stand up and shout sometimes. And we need to say, this does not make me happy. There's lots of room for this in Unitarian Universalism. We believe it is our duty in this lifetime to stand up for things that are right. And we've done that over and over again. It is one of the beauties of this faith tradition. Some of you may have done that at the most recent climate march in New York City. Some are doing that in schools or at work, maybe in this church, in your own homes. There comes a point in time when we say, no, your greed will not trump my body or my blood or the good things of this earth. I'd like to go back here at the end, near the end, to the Salem oak, that ancient tree I mentioned earlier. One thing I hadn't mentioned about this 500-year-old plus tree is where it stands. It actually stands in the midst of the cemetery of the old Salem Quaker Meeting House, and across from the meeting house itself. I loved that image when it came up on my computer screen, and I found out that the oldest tree in New Jersey is both guarding and being guarded by, living with the friends. I thought that was a beautiful image. It is the symbiosis between enduring earthly power, that tree, unbidden, just given just there for us to revel in. We had nothing to do with it. And our deepest human hopes, that meeting house, this meeting house, that ark of covenant between us and each other and all of that out there. It is a bridge between the rest of creation and ourselves, something we can see every day. A blessing and a reminder, an almost mystical acknowledgement that for all of our distance that we have somehow created or landed in between ourselves and the rest of nature, that we might still be connected. We might still care. It is a religious home down there in Salem, formed both of that meeting house, but also as they walk out or bury their dead or pick up the trash or get in their cars, visioned by that tree standing in its midst. I mentioned earlier when I said that the covenant between trees and humans isn't going so well, and I suspect I misspoke. Despite our seventh principle, which we read earlier, and our halogen light bulbs and our organic yogurt, I'm not convinced we have yet really formed a covenant, or perhaps re-covenanted with the natural world, our world. We can continue to move in that direction, though, as individuals and as this congregation. Because it turns out that we are powerful people, scarred, covered in bark, hit by lightning, rooted deep, sometimes uprooted. But despite our failings and everything else that comes our way, you are a powerful force in this universe. And we are immensely powerful congregations. We have barely touched that power as a people. We need to start thinking not only of our mission statements and our visions for church life, but again and again to remind ourselves of our mission to walk on the earth lightly, and our vision to become a people so big in our practice of love, the primary message of every religion in the world. So big in our practice of love that it spreads even beyond people, to embrace all beings and all creatures, even the entire world. And you think that is crazy? It's not crazy. That is the vision that has been at the heart of the human practice of spiritual searching forever. To make love so big that we even go outside ourselves. The good news, we are very lucky. We still have the trees. We have the spiritual, yogic, pagan, Jesus and Yoda-like wisdom of the woods, or whatever part out there touches you. And we have a faith community. We have this meeting house. The first is an icon of the world. Something tangible we can look to when we read positive news and it ain't so positive. Or when we hear again and again some bit about climate change that makes our heart sink. We have religious iconography all around us. Something tangible to see life working its wonder in the universe. And the second thing is we have our community here, a shelter but also a launching point. We will always bump into things we wish we hadn't bumped into. It seems we can't help but gobble up the fruit dropped from that tree of the knowledge of good and of evil. But if the religious life, the informed spiritual journey, the life I suspect you are trying to be on, if that tells us anything, it tells us that there are wiser ways of walking. Because after each collision, after each disaster, in your life, small or large, in the world, small or large, there remains the promise of moving forward wiser and kinder than before. That's why we do this. That's why you are here this morning. For the first time, or after many, many times, you are trying to move more wisely on the world and in your life. Because we are dying to remember again and again how to make our lives not merely bearable, but in touch with the peace that passeth understanding. Not merely bearable, but full of life and peace. Here's one suggestion of how you can recommit yourself to the covenant you might have known you needed to make in the first place. I want you to pick a tree. Maybe one that's just outside this building while it's in your head before you run off to do the things you'll be doing today. Maybe one in your yard or on the drive home or somewhere else entirely. I invite you to go up to that tree. Today, if you can manage it, later this week, try not to forget. Go up to the tree and for a second or a minute or however long you can stand it, touch it and audaciously, ridiculously, I want you to bless that tree. And I would like you to recognize its blessing back to you. If they are going to call us tree huggers, let's give them something to say. By doing this maybe silly small thing, I would like you to make some sort of connection with your body and the body of the world again. You don't have to think anything about it. You don't have to believe magic is happening, though I suspect it might be. You don't even have to like it very much. Because making a covenant isn't always about doing something we like to do. We know that as congregations. It is opening ourselves up to each other and the world. And to connect with something good and beyond you, incarnate in the world, an icon. This is about bodies and real life. You got to touch a tree. As my grandfather used to say, you got to get your hands dirty sometimes. You got to touch it and you got to bless it. You got to give thanks for it. Acknowledge it as a good unto itself, not for the apples or the limbs or the trunk, but just because it is. And then the funny thing is also there is a strange blessing, I swear to you, that will come back your direction. It may filter through your mind. You might not think of it for weeks. It may strike you right then and there. But there is something magical in the world, mystical, lovely, God-given, that is embodied in that icon of a tree. This is how covenant begins. This is what church is for, and what life ultimately is also for. Connecting and acknowledging and blessing. You want a meaning for your life? It's a good place to start. That's it. The Alpha and Omega. The end and the beginning. Connecting and acknowledging and blessing. Because though I am silent, there is singing around me. And though I am dark, there is vision around me. And though I am heavy, there is flight around me. Good news, folks. We can heal the part of the world that we dare to touch. But we have to touch it. Again and again and again. So touch a tree. It might start something holy.